Have you ever been manipulated by two people at the same time? My buddy Alex was the kind of guy who once bought a fully grown lion just to show it off at his party. And when the lion inevitably snapped and almost ate one of the attendees, he blamed it on his girlfriend Rosalie. She somehow got away with it, but ever since that day, Rosalie has had it out for Alex. She was the closest with me out of all his friends, so she hit me up one random day to meet at a coffee shop. When I walked in, she had already ordered the most expensive item on the menu for me and invited me to come sit. I started chowing down, and that's when she told me very bluntly that Alex needed to die. Turns out, he didn't blame her for the lion attack for no reason. He had been systematically grooming her 11-year-old sister and needed her in jail so he could continue what he was doing. She didn't tell me how she found out, no matter how much I asked, which definitely sussed me out. But I agreed because no sane person would make up a lie that big about someone. The next night, we broke into Alex's place. The broken lion cage was still there, and no matter how much I begged her not to, she planted the bag of snow in his drawer. Then she called the cops. Of course, they arrested Alex on the spot. That should have been that. I almost felt guilty for ruining the life of someone I considered a friend until Rosalie's 11-year-old sister turned on her. They had been extremely close, and the minute Alex was arrested, Jade was texting Rosalie the nastiest things she could think of. She called Alex the only person who actually understood her and cursed her sister out for putting him in prison. I was relieved because I thought we had genuinely caught a predator. Until 3 days later when Alex somehow made bail. He came directly to my house. Apparently his house had cameras the cops knew nothing about, and he saw me with Rosalie. He walked in without asking, and I saw what looked like a knife tucked under his waistband. When he sat down, he asked me point blank what I thought he was doing with Jade, the 11-year-old girl. I went white and my mind started racing. No Pidoo would outright ask what he was doing with his victim. I told him up front what I had heard, and even added the fact that Jade had texted her sister immediately after he got arrested. I told him it seemed suspicious. That's when he raised his eyebrows. Know why she cares about me that much, dude? He asked me in a tone that felt genuine. I asked him if it's because he was a Pidoo. He chuckled like it was funny. It's because I'm the only person in that girl's life who cares how she's doing? He pulled up screenshots of his now ex-girlfriend texting her little sister. You're nothing. You're worthless. My stomach sank. Alex wasn't a predator at all. He was actually trying to make this girl feel like a person. That's why I was still with her. Because I knew that the only way I could save Jade was through her. That was all the proof I needed. The next day, I went to Rosalie's house with Alex. I felt like a marionette caught in some sort of drama, but it was the most interesting my life had been in a long time. Rosalie's face turned a deep shade of red when she saw me and Alex, almost like she had been caught. That's when Jade appeared in the hallway. This was the first time I paid real attention to how skinny she always was. She ran to Alex and jumped in his arms, but then she kissed his cheek and he kissed hers back. I side-eyed him. Something he caught because he went red and told me he is just affectionate. We went inside, something Rosalie seemed oddly cool with, and started talking. Rosalie put Jade in her room. You know why we're here? Alex started. Rosalie had this guilty look on her face. She tried to act confused, but Alex interrupted her asking why she did this with me. Why she used such a horrible accusation to guilt me into getting rid of the one person protecting her 11-year-old sister. Rosalie started crumbling. Her face went white and she started stammering excuses. I thought we had finally gotten to the bottom of it, until we heard genuine sobbing coming from the bathroom. It was Jade. Jade and Alex both started screaming at each other over who should be the one to go check on her, so much so that I was actually the one to go because they were too distracted. That's when I saw it. Jade holding a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines. My eyes went wide and I just stood there in shock. Alex says if this happens to tell him immediately. My hands started shaking. I came back out and screamed about what I just witnessed, and the both of them just froze. What's strange is that Alex was all of a sudden telling me this test was probably fake, while Rosalie was going on about how much of a drama queen Jade has always been. 30 seconds ago, they had been fist-fighting over who was the one to go check on her. That's when Jade herself came out. She broke down on the floor apologizing to both of them. I honest had no idea what to do, and so I did the only thing I could think of. I called the authorities. It might not have been the smartest move, but I was done trying to figure out who the real bad guy was. Once they arrived, I explained the entire situation while both Alex and Rosalie were trying to convince the officer I was lying. They both got arrested, put in cuffs, and taken in for questioning, while Jade was taken to the station where she could finally explain the entire truth of what had been going on. The cop cars pulled away with Alex and Rosalie, while another officer guided Jade into a separate vehicle, and I stood there on the sidewalk realizing I'd probably need to follow them to give my own statement. I drove myself to the station, my hands shaking the whole way, and when I walked through those glass doors, the desk sergeant pointed me toward a waiting area filled with plastic chairs. Detective Omar Tyson came out about 20 minutes later. A tall guy with gray hair and a tired look on his face, and he led me down a hallway past several interview rooms. He put me in a small room with just a table and 2 chairs, told me someone would be with me soon, then closed the door behind him. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the mirror on the wall that was obviously one of those two-way things, replaying everything that had happened over the last few days. My stomach kept turning as I thought about breaking into Alex's place, planting those drugs, and how I'd gone along with everything Rosalie said without really questioning it. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, and I could hear muffled voices from other rooms, but nobody came to talk to me. I kept checking my phone, but there was no signal in that concrete box of a room. Through the small window in the door, I could see officers walking past occasionally, some carrying folders or coffee cups, but they all ignored me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept wiping my palms on my jeans because they were sweating so bad. Meanwhile, they'd taken Jade to a different part of the building, one of those special rooms they have for kids with softer lighting and comfortable chairs instead of the hard plastic ones. Brendan McCarthy from CPS showed up within an hour, a younger guy with a beard who looked like he'd seen too many bad situations already. He sat with Jade while a female officer asked her questions, making sure she felt safe and understood she wasn't in any trouble. She looked so small in that big chair, nothing like the girl who jumped into Alex's arms and kissed his cheek just hours ago. Her face was red from crying, and she kept pulling at the sleeves of her sweater, making them stretch down over her hands. Detective Tyson finally came back to my room after what my phone said was 3 hours, though it felt way longer. He sat down across from me with a yellow legal pad and a recorder that he placed between us on the table. He pressed the record button and stated the date and time, then asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I started with the lion party, how Alex had actually bought a full-grown lion just to show off and how it had attacked someone before he blamed it all on Rosalie. Then I told him about the coffee shop, how Rosalie had already ordered the most expensive thing on the menu for me when I showed up, and how she'd told me Alex needed to die. I explained how she'd said Alex was grooming Jade, her 11-year-old sister, and even though she wouldn't tell me how she knew, I believed her because nobody would make up something that serious. Detective Tyson wrote notes without looking up, his pen scratching across the paper while I talked about breaking into Alex's place the next night. I described finding the broken lion cage still sitting in his living room, how I'd begged Rosalie not to plant the bag of snow, but she did it anyway, then called the cops on him. The detective's face stayed blank the whole time, not giving away what he was thinking. I told him about Jade's text to Rosalie after Alex got arrested, calling him the only person who understood her, and how that had made me think we'd actually caught a predator. Then I explained Alex showing up at my house 3 days later with what looked like a knife in his waistband, how he'd shown me the screenshots of Rosalie calling Jade worthless, and how that had changed everything. When I got to the part about going to Rosalie's house and finding Jade with the pregnancy test, Detective Tyson finally looked up from his notes. I admitted I went along with Rosalie's plan, even though something had felt wrong about it from the start. The detective asked why I didn't come forward sooner if I had doubts, and I just sat there for a minute trying to think of an answer that didn't make me sound like an idiot. I told him I kept hoping someone else was the bad guy, so I wouldn't have to figure it out myself, which sounded even worse when I said it out loud. He asked if I'd seen any actual evidence of Alex doing anything inappropriate with Jade before agreeing to help Rosalie, and I had to admit I hadn't. There's something really weird about how Alex showed those screenshots of Rosalie calling Jade worthless, but then later he's kissing the kid on the cheek. That doesn't add up for me. In another room down the hall, Alex was telling his version to a different officer, explaining how he'd installed hidden cameras throughout his house after the lion incident for security. The officer's eyes apparently lit up when Alex mentioned the cameras because it meant there would be video evidence of the break-in. Alex gave them his login information for the cloud storage where the footage was saved, and they started pulling up the files right away. Rosalie was in a third interview room trying to stick to her story about Alex grooming Jade, but she kept tripping over her own lies. She couldn't explain why she needed to plant drugs if she really believed Alex was abusing her sister, and she kept changing details about how she supposedly found out about the abuse. First, she said Jade had told her directly, then she said she'd seen inappropriate texts, then she claimed she'd walked in on something suspicious. The detective interviewing her wrote down every contradiction, noting how her story kept shifting. CPS opened an emergency case file for Jade while all this was happening, with Brendan McCarthy officially assigned as her caseworker. He scheduled an immediate safety assessment since both potential guardians were in custody, and Jade would need somewhere safe to stay that night. The police seized Jade's phone as evidence and started going through her messages, finding all those nasty texts she'd sent Rosalie after Alex's arrest. They found more than just those angry messages, though, and the tech guys said they'd need to dig deeper to understand the full picture of what had been going on. Late that night, after going through my statement 3 more times with different officers, they finally released me with a warning that I might face charges for the break-in. Detective Tyson handed me his business card and told me not to leave town, that they'd probably need to talk to me again soon. I drove home feeling sick about everything, my head spinning from exhaustion and stress. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30, jarring me awake from a restless sleep. It was Detective Tyson asking me to come back to the station immediately because they'd found something on Alex's security cameras that I needed to see. My stomach dropped as I realized those cameras had probably caught everything. Me and Rosalie breaking in, planting the drugs, the whole thing crystal clear in high definition. I walked into the small viewing room where Detective Tyson had a laptop set up on the metal table. He clicked play, and there it was. Me and Rosalie walking up to Alex's back door at 2 in the morning. The camera angle showed everything perfectly. Rosalie picking the lock while I stood there looking around like an idiot. We went inside, and the next camera picked us up in Alex's bedroom, Rosalie pulling that bag of white powder from her jacket while I stood by the door keeping watch. She opened his dresser drawer and tucked it way in the back behind his socks. Then we both left the same way we came in. Detective Tyson paused the video and looked at me with this expression that said he knew exactly what happened. He asked if I wanted to change my statement now that we both saw what really went down. I told him, yeah, that was definitely me in the video, and Rosalie had convinced me Alex was doing bad things to her little sister. The detective wrote something down on his notepad and said I was going to need a lawyer because this was burglary and evidence tampering, both felonies that could mean serious prison time. He let me use the phone in the hallway to make some calls while he went to deal with other stuff. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely dial the number for Chase Osborne, this lawyer my dad had used for a DUI a few years back. Chase picked up on the third ring, and I explained everything as fast as I could, about the planted drugs and the security footage and how I thought I was protecting a kid. He told me to stop talking to anyone until he got there, but to cooperate with basic stuff like fingerprints if they asked. He said the video evidence was bad news, but we could work with the fact that I thought I was doing the right thing. While I waited for Chase to show up, I could hear activity down the hall where they were dealing with Jade. Brendan McCarthy from CPS had arrived and was talking to another officer about emergency placement since both Alex and Rosalie were in custody. They mentioned some foster mom named Ariella Hoffman who had experience with complicated cases like this. I heard Jade crying and asking when she could see Alex, which made my stomach turn because I still didn't know what the real story was. Chase showed up about an hour later in a wrinkled suit that looked like he'd thrown it on in a hurry. He talked to Detective Tyson for a few minutes privately, then came back and told me the situation was rough, but not hopeless. The video was clear evidence of the crime, but my cooperation and the circumstances might help reduce the charges. He said our best strategy was showing I got manipulated by Rosalie's story about protecting Jade. Meanwhile, they were taking Jade to get checked out by a forensic nurse at the hospital, standard procedure when there's any question about abuse or pregnancy. I heard one of the officers mention they needed to do proper blood work since home pregnancy tests could be wrong, especially if a kid doesn't use them right. Jade apparently kept saying she wasn't sure she did the test correctly and seemed really embarrassed about the whole thing. The nurse would handle all that and get real answers about whether she was actually pregnant or not. Later that afternoon, Alex's lawyer showed up, some guy named Luke Springer, who apparently specialized in criminal defense. I could hear him in the next room arguing with the prosecutor, Mackenzie Luna, about the drug charges. He kept pointing out that the security footage proved Alex wasn't even home when the drugs got planted, which meant the possession charge was completely bogus. Luna had to admit the drug case was dead, but said they still had other concerns about Alex's relationship with Jade that needed investigating. Detective Tyson spent hours going through Jade's phone, which they'd taken as evidence. He found messages between her and some 15-year-old boy from her school, lots of flirty stuff about meeting up and doing things they shouldn't be talking about. Nothing super explicit, but definitely not appropriate for an 11-year-old girl to be discussing with a teenager. The timing of these messages might explain why Jade had a pregnancy test in the first place. Brendan McCarthy interviewed Jade once she got back from the hospital, asking about her life at home with Rosalie. I could hear parts of it through the thin walls, Jade talking about how her sister always made her feel worthless and stupid. She showed him old text messages where Rosalie called her terrible names and said she was nothing but a burden. Jade kept saying Alex was the only adult who ever made her feel special or important, which explained why she got so upset when he was arrested. The blood test results came back the next day and showed Jade wasn't pregnant after all. The nurse thought either the home test was a false positive, which happens sometimes, or more likely Jade just didn't use it right. Everyone seemed relieved, but there were still questions about why an 11-year-old had a pregnancy test to begin with and what was going on with that boy from the school. Alex was meeting with his lawyer, Luke Springer, in another interview room when I heard him admit that, yeah, he did kiss Jade on the cheek and bought her presents sometimes. He said he was just trying to be nice since Rosalie was so mean to her, but Springer told him that didn't matter because it still looked inappropriate to everyone else. Even if his intentions were good, the whole situation was a mess that made him look guilty of something. The next morning, Rosalie's lawyer showed up. This guy named Corbin Hess, who kept trying to make her look like some desperate sister just trying to protect Jade. He sat there in his fancy suit telling the cops how scared Rosalie was about Alex hurting her little sister. But the evidence was too much. The security footage of us planting drugs plus her lying to the police meant she was looking at serious charges. The prosecutor told Corbin that Rosalie could face years for false reporting and evidence tampering. I watched through the window as Rosalie's face went white when she heard the possible prison time. 3 days passed with everyone still being questioned and investigated. Detective Tyson called me back in because he found something on Jade's phone that changed things. He showed me texts between Jade and some 15-year-old boy from her school where they talked about running away together. The kid had written stuff about being ready for adult things and wanting to do stuff they shouldn't be talking about. It explained why Jade might have had that pregnancy test in the first place. The detective kept scrolling through months of messages where this boy kept pushing Jade to meet up alone. CPS got involved heavy after seeing all this evidence, and they determined neither Alex nor Rosalie could take care of Jade right now. The caseworker explained that Alex had major boundary problems even if he wasn't a predator, and Rosalie was emotionally abusive based on all those texts calling Jade worthless. They recommended keeping Jade in foster care while both adults got professional help. That same afternoon, the prosecutor called me into her office with my lawyer, Chase. She laid out all the evidence against me, the security footage, my confession, everything that could send me to prison for years. But then she offered me a deal. Plead guilty to misdemeanor trespassing and testify against Rosalie, and they'd drop the felony charges. Chase grabbed my arm and told me to take it immediately because the video evidence would destroy me at trial. Talk about security cameras coming back to bite everyone. Alex put them up after his lion tried to eat someone, and now they're showing a midnight breaking and entering special starring 2 people who really should have thought this through better. I agreed right there and signed the papers with my hands shaking. The next day, they officially dismissed Alex's drug charges since everyone knew they were planted. But CPS still said he couldn't have unsupervised contact with Jade because of the boundary issues. Luke told Alex to accept it for now and work on proving he could maintain appropriate boundaries with kids. Alex was mad, but agreed because he didn't have much choice. Within a week, the local news picked up the story about the false drug planting. They didn't use our names, but everyone in town figured out who it was anyway. Alex's boss saw the news and put him on unpaid leave while everything got sorted out. His whole reputation was ruined even though the drug charges were dropped. Meanwhile, Jade started therapy with someone named Heather Bell, who specialized in childhood trauma. I heard from the foster mom that in their first session, Jade kept bouncing between defending Alex and blaming Rosalie. She didn't understand what appropriate boundaries even meant after everything that happened. The therapist had a lot of work ahead of her to help this kid understand normal relationships. Detective Tyson tracked down the schoolboy who was messaging Jade and brought him in with his parents. The kid admitted they talked about sex stuff but swore nothing physical ever happened between them. His parents looked ready to die from embarrassment and grounded him on the spot. The detective told them they were lucky their son wasn't facing charges given Jade's age. 2 weeks into all this legal mess, Rosalie finally broke down during another interrogation session. She admitted she planted the drugs because she was jealous of how close Alex was with Jade. She felt replaced by her own sister and wanted Alex gone from their lives. Corbin tried to spin it as temporary emotional distress, but the prosecutor wasn't buying it. Rosalie sat there crying about how Alex gave Jade all the attention she used to get. It was pathetic watching a grown woman admit to destroying lives over jealousy. The school counselor came forward with more information about Jade's behavior over the past few months. She'd been seeking attention from older boys at the school and got caught passing notes with inappropriate content. The counselor said this pattern started right around when Rosalie's verbal abuse toward Jade got worse. She showed reports of Jade trying to sit on older boys' laps at lunch and writing love letters to 8th graders. The poor kid was so desperate for positive attention, she'd take it from anyone who offered. All this evidence painted a picture of a messed-up situation where nobody was completely innocent or completely guilty. Alex crossed boundaries trying to help. Rosalie was abusive and vindictive, and Jade was a confused kid acting out. I felt sick realizing how deep this whole mess went and how I'd gotten pulled right into the middle of it. My community service would start soon, and I'd have to live with my part in making everything worse. Mackenzie Luna met with Rosalie and her lawyer Corbin in a small conference room at the courthouse 3 weeks after everything went down. I wasn't there, but Corbin told me later that Mackenzie laid out the deal on the table like she was ordering lunch. 18 months probation, mandatory counseling twice a week, and parenting classes every Saturday if Rosalie ever wanted to see Jade again without supervision. Rosalie's hands were shaking as she looked at the papers, and she kept asking Corbin if there was another way. He told her straight up that with the evidence against her for planting drugs and lying to police, this was a gift. She could be looking at 5 years in prison for what she did. Rosalie kept pushing back, saying she was trying to protect her sister, but Mackenzie wasn't having any of it. The prosecutor had already talked to Detective Tyson and knew the whole story about how Rosalie was jealous of Alex's relationship with Jade. 2 days later, I had my own court date for the trespassing charge. Chase sat next to me in the courtroom while I stood in front of the judge and entered my guilty plea for misdemeanor trespassing. The judge was this older woman who looked at me over her glasses like she could see right through me. She sentenced me to 100 hours of community service and a year of probation, then spent 10 minutes lecturing me about thinking for myself instead of following other people into stupid situations. I just stood there nodding and saying yes, ma'am, every time she paused. Chase had warned me to keep my mouth shut and accept whatever they gave me since the video evidence was so clear. The judge told me I was lucky the prosecutor agreed to drop the felony charges for evidence tampering. Meanwhile, Alex had started seeing a therapist that Luke found for him, someone who worked with adults who had boundary issues with kids. Alex told me later that the first session was rough because the therapist made him walk through every interaction he'd had with Jade over the past year. He thought he was helping her by giving her attention when Rosalie was being cruel, but the therapist helped him see how buying gifts for an 11-year-old and kissing her cheek looked from the outside. The therapist said Alex wasn't a predator, but he had serious work to do on understanding appropriate boundaries. Alex seemed relieved to hear he wasn't some monster, but also confused about where the line was supposed to be. During this same time, Jade was having her own therapy sessions with Heather Bell at the foster home. Ariella told the caseworker that Jade had finally admitted something big during her 4th session. She'd faked the pregnancy test to get attention because she saw it in some movie where a girl did the same thing to make adults care about her problems. Jade had bought the test at a gas station and peed on it wrong on purpose to make it show positive. She felt terrible about lying, but thought it was the only way to make Alex and Rosalie stop fighting over her and actually see that she needed help. Heather said this was actually progress because Jade was starting to understand how her actions affected other people. Ariella called Brendan McCarthy to update him on how Jade was doing at the foster home after 2 weeks. She said Jade was eating better and gaining some weight, but still had nightmares most nights where she'd wake up crying for Alex. Ariella had to be firm about the no-contact order, even when Jade begged to just talk to him on the phone. She'd sit with Jade and let her cry it out, then remind her that these rules were to keep everyone safe while the adults figured things out. Progress was happening, but it was slow, and Jade still didn't really understand why she couldn't see the people she considered family. A month after that day at Rosalie's house, she finally took the plea deal Mackenzie offered. The courtroom was almost empty when she stood in front of the judge and was accepted the terms. She had to attend therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and parenting classes every Saturday morning for the next year. The judge warned her that any violation of these terms meant immediate incarceration for the full 5 years she could have gotten. Rosalie just nodded and signed the papers while Corbin stood next to her. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her. Around the same time, Alex's workplace finally finished their internal investigation about the whole situation. Luke had been working with them to provide context about what really happened. They concluded Alex hadn't committed any crimes, but the whole thing was still a PR nightmare for the company. They transferred him to a different department on the other side of the building with a 20% pay cut. Luke told him he was lucky they didn't fire him outright. Alex took it without arguing and started showing up early every day to prove he was still a good employee. His new boss didn't know the details, but treated him like he was on thin ice anyway. Detective Tyson called me to his office a week later to sign some final paperwork and officially close the criminal investigation. He said all the matters were resolved through plea deals, so there wouldn't be any trials. While I was signing the forms, he told me this case was one of the messiest he'd seen in 20 years. Nobody was completely evil, but nobody was completely innocent either. He said Alex had boundary issues, Rosalie had control and jealousy problems, and Jade was a confused kid caught in the middle of adult drama. Even I had my part in making things worse by not thinking for myself. He hoped we'd all learned something from this disaster. Jade's therapy with Heather was starting to show tiny signs of progress after 6 weeks. Heather told Brendan that Jade was beginning to understand what healthy relationships looked like and why the way Alex showed affection wasn't appropriate even if he meant well. She was also starting to see how Rosalie's verbal abuse had pushed her to seek attention from anyone who would give it. Heather said it would take months or maybe years to undo all the damage, but Jade was young and had a good chance of healing if she stuck with the therapy. The kid was resilient even after everything she'd been through. I started my community service at a local youth center the next Monday, which felt weird since I'd be working with kids around Jade's age. The supervisor didn't know my whole story, but gave me strict rules about maintaining professional boundaries with the children. I spent my first shift organizing sports equipment and watching how the other volunteers interacted with the kids, keeping clear physical distance and never being alone with any child. It made me think hard about how adults could affect kids without meaning to, and how easy it was to cross lines without realizing it. 2 months passed before CPS finally let Rosalie see Jade again, but only for 1 hour a week with someone watching them the whole time. Jade faked the pregnancy test to get adults to pay attention to her problems? That's such a sad but clever move for an 11-year-old to think up from watching a movie. I wonder what goes through a kid's mind when they feel that desperate for help that lying seems like the only option left. I heard about it from the supervisor at the youth center who knew Ariella. The first visit happened on a Tuesday afternoon at the CPS office downtown. Rosalie showed up 20 minutes early and sat in the waiting room picking at her fingernails until they called her back. Jade was already in the meeting room with the social worker when Rosalie walked in. The kid barely looked up from the coloring book she was working on. Rosalie sat down across from her and tried to start talking, but Jade just kept coloring. After 10 minutes of trying to get any response, Rosalie started crying right there in front of everyone. The social worker had to remind her to keep it together for Jade's sake. When the hour was up, Jade walked out without saying goodbye. Rosalie sat in her car in the parking lot for another hour just sobbing, but she came back the next week anyway, and the week after that. Meanwhile, Alex had to move out of his nice apartment since the pay cut made it impossible to afford. Some friends helped him pack everything into a U-Haul one Saturday. His new place was a studio apartment on the other side of town, one of those buildings where you can hear everything through the walls. He deleted all his social media accounts and stopped going to the bars where our friend group used to hang out. One of our mutual friends ran into him at the grocery store and told me Alex looked different, more careful about everything he did, always checking who was around him before speaking. The kid from Jade's school who'd been messaging her ended up transferring to another district entirely. His parents pulled him out after the whole investigation thing. They wanted him to have a fresh start somewhere nobody knew about what happened. Heather told Ariella during one of their check-ins that Jade seemed relieved the boy was gone. During therapy, Jade admitted she felt pressured by him to do things she wasn't ready for, but didn't know how to tell him no. She thought if she said no, he wouldn't like her anymore, and then nobody at the school would talk to her. 3 weeks later, I was at the grocery store grabbing some frozen pizzas when I turned the corner and almost ran my cart straight into Rosalie. We both froze for a second, then just nodded at each other. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but more put together than before. Her hair was clean, and she was wearing actual clothes instead of pajamas. Neither of us said anything about what happened. We just stood there for maybe 5 seconds before going our separate ways, but there was this understanding between us, like we both knew we'd messed up bad and were trying to fix it. 3 months after everything went down, Heather had Jade write letters to both Alex and Rosalie as part of her therapy homework. The letters weren't meant to be sent, just to help Jade work through her feelings. She wrote about being mad at Rosalie for always calling her worthless and stupid. She wrote about being confused why Alex's hugs and kisses felt wrong when he was the only person who was nice to her. Heather helped her understand that adults shouldn't show affection to kids that way, even if they mean well. Brendan McCarthy called Ariella with an update, and she mentioned it to the supervisor at the youth center who told me during my shift. Jade was doing way better in the school, actually turning in homework and participating in class. She'd made 2 friends her own age who invited her to sit with them at lunch. The foster placement was working out better than anyone expected. Ariella was patient with Jade and didn't push too hard, but still had rules and structure. Around the same time, Rosalie hit the halfway point of her required therapy sessions. Her therapist wrote in the progress report that she was showing real improvement. Turns out Rosalie's own mom had been pretty awful to her growing up, always putting her down and making her feel worthless. It didn't excuse what she did to Jade, but it explained why she didn't know how to be a good sister. The therapist was helping her break those patterns. Alex's therapist cleared him as not being dangerous to children after 3 months of sessions, but the therapist still recommended he keep going to work on his boundary issues. Alex agreed to continue, even though the court didn't require it anymore. Luke told me Alex seemed committed to actually changing, not just going through the motions to get people off his back. My probation officer did my monthly check-in and said I was doing great with the community service. Working with the kids at the youth center was actually pretty rewarding once I got used to it. I helped coach basketball and organized game nights, but I was always super careful about maintaining appropriate boundaries, making sure I was never alone with any kid, always keeping physical distance, following every single rule they gave me. 4 months after that horrible night at Rosalie's house, Heather had a breakthrough with Jade. During their session, Jade said she was ready to forgive Rosalie for the mean things she said, but she needed more time when it came to Alex. She understood now that the way he showed affection wasn't right, even if he was trying to help her. She could see the difference between appropriate adult behavior and what Alex did. Heather said this was huge progress for an 11-year-old to understand such complicated emotional stuff. The next week, CPS had their big meeting about Jade's case and decided to keep her with Ariella for another 6 months. But they gave Rosalie more visits, letting her see Jade twice a week instead of just once. Brendan McCarthy told me this when I ran into him at the courthouse paying a parking ticket. He said they were actually working toward getting Jade back with her sister if Rosalie kept doing what she was supposed to. The visits were going better each time, with less crying and more actual talking between them. Around the same time, Alex did something nobody expected. He wrote this long letter to CPS taking full blame for crossing boundaries with Jade. Luke Springer showed me a copy when I stopped by his office to sign some paperwork for my own case. Alex didn't ask to see Jade or anything like that. He just wanted them to know he understood what he did wrong and supported whatever was best for her. Luke said this actually helped Alex's case because it showed he was taking responsibility instead of making excuses. My 100 hours of community service were finally coming to an end at the youth center. I'd been coaching basketball and organizing game nights for kids around Jade's age. The supervisor pulled me aside on my last official day and told me I was really good with the kids. She offered me an actual part-time job there, minimum wage, but still paid work. I took it right away because honestly, working with those kids were the first thing in months that made me feel like I wasn't a total screw-up. 5 months after that crazy night at Rosalie's house, something big happened during one of their therapy sessions together. Heather Bell called Brendan about it, and he mentioned it to me when I saw him at the youth center picking up forms. Rosalie had finally given Jade a real apology for all the mean things she'd said over the years. Not some half-hearted sorry, but a real breakdown where she admitted she'd been awful and wrong. Jade actually cried in her sister's arms for the first time since this whole mess started. Heather called it a major turning point in their relationship. The judge scheduled a review hearing for everyone's progress a week later. I had to go because of my probation, so I got to see everything firsthand. The judge looked through all the reports from therapists, CPS, probation officers, everyone involved. She officially closed the active CPS case, but with conditions attached. Jade would stay with Ariella for 3 more months while Rosalie finished her court requirements. If everything kept going well, they could start working on getting Jade home permanently. Rosalie sat there crying when the judge said there was real hope for reunification. Meanwhile, Alex was rebuilding his work life after everything that happened. His boss at the new department he'd been transferred to had no idea about the full story. All he saw was someone showing up early, staying late, and doing solid work without complaining. 6 months after his transfer, they promoted him to team lead with a small raise. Alex kept his head down and focused on proving himself professionally. He stopped going to bars with coworkers and deleted all his social media accounts. Luke told me Alex was different now, more careful about everything he did. Jade's life at the school changed completely, too. Her grades went from barely passing to getting B's and even some A's. She joined the art club and actually made friends her own age. Ariella told Brendan that Jade was like a whole different kid compared to when she first arrived. She still had bad days where she'd get quiet or angry about everything that happened. But most days, she was just a normal 11-year-old girl worried about homework and what to wear to the school. The art teacher said Jade had real talent and was thinking about entering her work in the district competition. Rosalie got herself together financially, too. She found a better job at a medical office that came with health insurance. The insurance covered her therapy sessions, which was huge since she'd been paying out of pocket before. She'd been completely sober from alcohol for 4 months and was going to support group meetings twice a week. Her therapist wrote in the progress reports that Rosalie was really committed to change and had good chances of getting Jade back if she stayed on track. She'd even started saving money to get a bigger apartment with a proper bedroom for Jade. 6 months after I'd called the cops that night, Detective Tyson called me to come sign some final paperwork at the station. What makes me wonder is how Jade could write those therapy letters about Alex's behavior, but still have such mixed feelings about him. She understood his actions were wrong, but couldn't fully separate that from him being nice to her, which shows just how confusing this whole situation must be for an 11-year-old trying to process such complicated emotions. When I got there, he had this whole stack of forms closing out the investigation. While I signed everything, he told me Jade was doing great in foster care and making real progress. He said both Alex and Rosalie were doing better too, staying out of trouble and working on themselves. Then he said something that stuck with me about how sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can start climbing back up. He'd seen it hundreds of times in his career. My probation was finally ending after a full year of checking in monthly and staying out of trouble. Chase Osborne met me at the courthouse for the final hearing. The judge reviewed my case and said I'd completed everything successfully. My record would be sealed after 1 more year of good behavior, which meant most employers wouldn't see it on background checks. Chase told me afterward that I got lucky, but also made smart choices by cooperating from the start and taking responsibility. He said I'd learned some expensive lessons about thinking for myself instead of just going along with what other people wanted. 2 weeks later, Chase called to tell me Rosalie had finished all her court stuff and passed every requirement they threw at her. The parenting classes, the therapy sessions twice a week, the anger management course, she did it all without missing a single appointment. Brendan from CPS showed up at my work at the youth center with paperwork saying they approved a plan for Rosalie to start getting Jade back. They'd start with supervised visits every Saturday at the CPS office for 2 hours. Then if that went okay, they'd move to unsupervised weekends at Rosalie's new apartment. She'd gotten a two-bedroom place with money she saved from her new job at the medical office downtown. The second bedroom had a real bed and desk for Jade, not just a mattress on the floor like before. Brendan said if everything stayed stable for 3 months, Jade could move back home full-time with monthly check-ins from CPS. Alex wasn't allowed anywhere near Jade because of the no-contact order, but Brendan mentioned Alex had been sending money every month to a college savings account he helped set up. $200 each time, which added up to almost $2,000 already. Alex never asked for updates or tried to contact anyone about it, just kept the deposits coming like clockwork. His bank statements showed he was living on ramen and cheap groceries to afford it. Luke told Brendan that Alex wanted Jade to have options when she turned 18, even if he couldn't be part of her life anymore. 3 months passed, and Jade packed up her stuff at Ariella's foster home to move back with Rosalie. I helped them carry boxes up the stairs to the apartment while Jade showed me the drawings she'd been working on in art class. She'd gotten really good, way better than the stick figures most kids her age drew. Rosalie had framed some of them and hung them in the living room. Their first week together was rough, with Jade testing every boundary and Rosalie struggling not to snap back with mean comments. But they both went to therapy every Wednesday afternoon with Heather, who taught them this thing called active listening, where they had to repeat back what the other person said before responding. It actually worked most of the time. Jade started bringing friends home from the school, something that never happened before because she was too embarrassed of their old place. The youth center became my whole life after my probation ended. I worked there 5 days a week teaching kids basketball and helping with homework in the afternoons. My boss said I had a way of spotting the kids who needed extra attention, the ones hiding bruises or coming in hungry. One kid reminded me of Jade with how he flinched when adults raised their voices. I made sure he always had snacks in his backpack and knew he could talk to me if things got bad at home. We got him connected with a counselor before things escalated. Knowing what to look for because of everything that happened with Jade probably saved that kid from going through something similar. My phone buzzed one random Tuesday, almost a year after that crazy night at Rosalie's house. Alex's name popped up on the screen for the first time since everything went down. His text was short, just said he was doing good at his new job and hoped I was too. He mentioned he'd been sober for 8 months and was seeing a therapist twice a month still. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that I was glad he was doing better. We weren't friends anymore and never would be again, but I didn't hate him. We both made terrible choices that night and the weeks after. The difference was, we both learned from them. Rosalie sent me a picture a few weeks later of Jade at her middle school science fair. She'd won second place for some project about plants growing in different types of light. Jade was holding this huge ribbon and actually smiling. Not the fake smile she used to do, but a real one that reached her eyes. Rosalie wrote that Jade was getting straight B's now, and even made the honor roll last quarter. She still went to therapy every other week, but Heather said she was processing everything in a healthy way. The nightmares had mostly stopped, and she wasn't seeking attention from older kids anymore. She joined the art club and the drama club and spent most weekends hanging out with friends her own age at the mall or the movies. Normal kid stuff that she never got to do before. Looking back at everything, that whole insane week changed every single person involved. Alex learned about boundaries the hard way and lost access to a kid he genuinely cared about. Rosalie had to face her own abuse and how it was affecting Jade. Jade got the help she desperately needed, even though the process was traumatic. I learned to think for myself and found a job where I could actually help kids who reminded me of her. Nobody got the outcome they wanted at the start, but everyone got what they actually needed to become better people. These days, my life is pretty boring, and I'm completely fine with that. I wake up, go to work at the youth center, come home and watch TV or play video games. No drama, no late-night break-ins, no pregnancy scares with 11-year-olds. Sometimes I think about how I used to want my life to be more interesting, more exciting. That week taught me that boring is underrated. When people come to me with their problems now, I think real hard before getting involved. Most of the time, I give advice and step back, letting them handle their own situations. The youth center kids are different because that's my job and I'm trained for it now. But in my personal life, I've learned that other people's drama rarely ends well for anyone involved. Well, folks, that's our wild ride from chaos to calm, and I've loved every minute of being your commentary companion through it all. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments. And hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.